Alex stood at the edge of the crowded office party, watching everyone else have fun. He sipped his water slowly while the big shots of Pinnacle Tech laughed and clinked their fancy champagne glasses. At just 27, he was at least 10 years younger than anyone else there. His simple blue suit looked plain next to their designer outfits. Nobody really noticed him. That was fine. Alex had gotten used to being invisible in the 6 months since he joined as what they called a digital innovation consultant. It was just a fancy title for someone they barely listened to. The company CEO, Mr. Richards, was holding court near the snack table. His booming voice carried across the room as he told a golf story that had all the vice presidents laughing too hard. Alex had tried to talk to him twice before, but Mr. Richards always seemed to suddenly remember an important call he had to make. "Enjoying yourself?" a voice asked beside him. Alex turned to see Lisa from accounting. She was one of the few people who actually talked to him. "Just observing," he said with a small smile. "I learn a lot that way." "Like what?" Lisa grabbed a mini sandwich from a passing tray. Alex took a moment before answering. "Like how the shipping manager and the sales director barely speak to each other even though their departments depend on each other. Or how nobody uses the expensive software system they bought last year because it's too complicated." Lisa raised her eyebrows. "You notice a lot." "That's what they pay me for. At least, that's what they should be paying me for." Across the room, Mr. Richards was now showing off pictures of his new boat. The vice presidents were nodding with forced interest. "Have they listened to any of your ideas yet?" Lisa asked. Alex shook his head. "Not really. I've put together 3 different proposals to fix their outdated systems." They smile, say interesting, and then nothing happens. "That's Pinnacle for you. Been doing things the same way for 40 years. Why change now?" Lisa's voice had a touch of the same frustration Alex felt. Later that evening, Alex left the party early and walked to the bus stop. Nobody noticed him go. The cold air felt good after the stuffy office. As he waited for the bus, he pulled out his notebook and added some notes about what he observed tonight. His tiny apartment was only a 20-minute ride away. It wasn't much, just 1 bedroom with basic furniture, but the rent was cheap, and that's what mattered. Alex needed to save every penny right now. He unlocked his door and flipped on the lights. His living room looked nothing like his simple work persona would suggest. 3 computer monitors sat on a makeshift desk. Whiteboards covered nearly every wall, filled with diagrams, flowcharts, and sticky notes. This was Alex's real office, where he was building something that would change everything. He tossed his jacket on the couch and went straight to his computer. While the big shots were still drinking and laughing at their party, Alex was getting to work. He pulled up the company's distribution data he'd been secretly analyzing for months. Everyone at Pinnacle thought Alex was just a young guy with some naive ideas about modernizing their systems. What they didn't know was that he saw the massive blind spots in their business model, gaps that would eventually sink them if nothing changed. "They think I'm just taking notes in meetings," Alex said to himself as his fingers flew across the keyboard. "They have no idea I'm mapping their entire operation." On his center screen, a complex diagram showed Pinnacle's supply chain, a tangled mess of outdated processes and wasted resources. On another screen was Alex's solution, a streamlined system that could save millions and work 10 times faster. He took a sip of cold coffee and smiled. Let them underestimate him. Let them think he was just some kid who didn't understand how things work in this industry. While they were protecting their old ways, Alex was building their future. They just didn't know it yet. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Big presentation tomorrow. Alex would try once more to show them what he could do. Maybe this time they'd listen. But deep down, he was already thinking beyond Pinnacle. If they wouldn't use his ideas, someone else would. And when his system took off, when it changed the whole industry, how interesting it would be to see their faces then. Alex cracked his knuckles and got back to work. Tonight was going to be a long one, but he didn't mind. The people who would change tomorrow's world weren't at parties right now. They were working while everyone else slept. Alex arrived early for the meeting, setting up his presentation while the boardroom was still empty. He'd stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting his proposal, making sure every slide was clear and every number was backed up with solid data. This was his third attempt to convince Pinnacle Tech's leadership that their distribution system needed a complete overhaul. Twice before, they'd nodded politely and then done nothing. Today would be different. It had to be. The executives filed in one by one, carrying coffee cups and chatting about last night's game. Mr. Richards, the CEO, was the last to arrive. He glanced at Alex and gave a quick nod before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Let's keep this brief, folks," Mr. Richards said, checking his watch. "I've got a call with the Tokyo office in 40 minutes. Alex took a deep breath. "Thank you all for your time today. I've been analyzing our distribution network for the past 6 months, and I've identified several areas where we're losing money." He clicked to the first slide, which showed a map of their current shipping routes, a mess of overlapping lines and bottlenecks that wasted both time and fuel. "Our current system requires products to pass through an average of 3 warehouses before reaching customers," Alex explained. "With the digital platform I've developed, we could reduce that to just 1 touch point in most cases, cutting delivery times in half and saving roughly 20% on shipping costs." Mr. Peterson, the CFO, frowned and adjusted his glasses. "That sounds highly theoretical. Our system has been functioning adequately for decades." "Adequately, yes," Alex said, "but our competitors are starting to use similar technology. If we don't adapt, we'll be left behind." He moved to the next slide, showing the potential savings, over $2 million in the first year alone. For 20 minutes, Alex walked them through his proposal with energy and clarity. He explained how blockchain technology could make every step of the process transparent, how machine learning could predict demand and optimize inventory, how their customers would have real-time tracking of every order. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Had he finally gotten through to them? Mr. Richards cleared his throat. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Alex, but that's simply not how things work in this industry. The upfront costs would be enormous, and our clients are used to our current system." "But the data clearly shows," Alex started. "The data doesn't show 40 years of established relationships," Mr. Peterson cut in. "You're new to this business. There are complexities you don't understand yet." Around the table, the other executives nodded in agreement. They had already made up their minds before he'd said a single word. "Perhaps we can implement some small improvements to the current system," offered Ms. Thompson from operations, not looking up from her phone. "We could revisit this next quarter." Next quarter. The same thing they'd said 6 months ago. Alex closed his laptop slowly. There was no point arguing further. "Thank you for your time," he said quietly. As the executives filed out, discussing lunch plans as if the meeting had never happened, Alex stayed behind, gathering his materials. Lisa from accounting poked her head in the door. "How did it go?" she asked. Alex gave a small, bitter smile. "Same as always. They're not interested in changing anything." "I'm sorry," Lisa said. "For what it's worth, I thought your last proposal was brilliant." "Thanks." Alex packed his bag, a strange calmness settling over him. This wasn't anger or disappointment, it was something else. Clarity. On the walk back to his desk, Alex made a decision. He'd given Pinnacle 3 chances to see what was right in front of them. He wouldn't waste his time on a 4th. That evening, instead of updating his proposal as he'd planned, Alex opened a new document on his home computer. He titled it Neolink Business Plan. If Pinnacle wouldn't build his system, he would do it himself. He worked through the night, fueled by a mix of coffee and determination. By dawn, he had outlined the core features, identified potential clients, and sketched a rough timeline. He'd need funding, a small team, and at least a year of development time. It was risky. He'd have to quit his job eventually. He might fail completely. But as the sun rose outside his window, Alex felt more alive than he had in months. Let Pinnacle stick to their old ways, he would build the future without them. When his alarm went off, reminding him to get ready for work, Alex hit snooze and kept typing. His job at Pinnacle was already in the past. He just didn't work there yet. For 2 more months, Alex lived a double life. By day, he was still the ignored consultant at Pinnacle Tech, sitting through meetings where no one asked for his opinion. But every night and weekend, his small apartment transformed into the birthplace of Neolink. The living room walls were now completely covered with diagrams, sticky notes, and printouts. His computer had barely been turned off in weeks. Alex had even set up a cot in the corner because some nights it wasn't worth walking to the bedroom. "You look terrible," Lisa told him one morning as they waited for the elevator. "Are you sleeping at all?" Alex yawned. "Not much, but I'm making progress." "On what?" "Another proposal they won't raid." He smiled mysteriously. "Something like that." What Alex couldn't tell her was that he'd nearly finished building a working prototype of his distribution platform. Using open-source tools and countless hours of coding, he had created a basic version of the system Pinnacle had rejected. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The problem was money. His savings were draining fast. Between rent, food, and the cloud server costs for his project, Alex had maybe 2 months before he'd be broke. He needed funding, but that meant quitting his job to focus on Neuralink full-time, a terrifying prospect. That Friday, Alex made his decision. He submitted his 2 weeks' notice through the company's HR portal. Within minutes, his phone rang. "You're quitting?" Lisa sounded shocked. "Where are you going?" "I'm starting my own thing," Alex said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Wow, bold move." She paused. "Does anyone upstairs know yet?" "Doubt they'll care much. Mr. Richards probably doesn't even remember which department I work in." Sure enough, when Alex met with HR for his exit interview, no executives bothered to find out why he was leaving. His badge was deactivated, his company email shut down, and just like that, his time at Pinnacle was over. Now came the hard part. Alex had researched local investors who specialized in supply chain technology. He'd rehearsed his pitch until he could recite it in his sleep, but getting meetings proved difficult. Without a track record or connections, most wouldn't even take his call. Finally, one agreed to hear him out, a small venture capital firm downtown. The morning of the meeting, Alex's ancient car refused to start. Of course it would happen today. After a frantic call for a rideshare that never arrived, he ended up taking 3 different buses to reach the office building, arriving 7 minutes late and slightly sweaty. "Mr. Howard will see you now," the receptionist said, barely looking up. The investor, Mr. Howard, was younger than Alex expected, maybe mid-40s, with a no-nonsense expression and a firm handshake. "So you're the Pinnacle guy. You've got 15 minutes. Impress me." Alex connected his laptop to the projector and launched into his presentation. He explained the massive inefficiencies in current distribution systems, demonstrated his prototype, and outlined how Neuralink would revolutionize the industry. "Companies waste millions on outdated methods," Alex explained, pulling up a graph. "My platform cuts out those unnecessary steps. It's like comparing horse-drawn carriages to modern cars." Mr. Howard listened silently, occasionally typing notes on his phone. When Alex finished, the investor leaned back in his chair. "Your technology looks promising," he said finally. "But I've seen dozens of supply chain startups fail because they couldn't get companies to change their established processes. Why would anyone switch to your system?" It was the same objection Pinnacle had raised. But this time, Alex was ready. "Because their competitors will," he answered simply. "I've already spoken with 3 smaller distributors who are desperate for an edge against the giants. They don't have the luxury of clinging to outdated methods. Once they adopt this and start saving money, the bigger players will have to follow or get left behind." Mr. Howard nodded slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to interest. "How much are you looking for?" $200,000 for initial development and a small team. The investor stood up. "I'll need to discuss this with my partners. But I'm intrigued. You've clearly identified a real problem." As Alex packed up his computer, his hands were shaking slightly. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Outside the building, he checked his almost empty bank account on his phone. He had enough for maybe 1 more month of rent. Everything depended on this investment coming through. If it didn't, Alex pushed the thought away. He'd worry about that tomorrow. Today, for the first time, someone had actually listened to his idea. It was a start. 2 weeks passed with no word from Mr. Howard. Alex called twice, only to be told the investors were still discussing his proposal. Meanwhile, his rent was due in 3 days, and his fridge contained nothing but half a carton of milk and some questionable leftovers. He was sitting in a cheap coffee shop, nursing a single cup for hours while using their Wi-Fi, when his phone finally rang. "Alex, this is Robert Howard. We'd like to move forward with Neuralink." Alex nearly knocked over his coffee. That's fantastic. When can we? Let's meet tomorrow to sign the papers. And Alex? I hope you're ready to work harder than you ever have in your life. The next day was a blur of contracts, handshakes, and plans. Instead of the $200,000 Alex had asked for, the investors offered $175,000, with strict milestones attached to each funding release. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough to get started. 1 month later, Neolink had a tiny office in a rundown building. Alex had hired 2 people: Tom, a programmer he knew from college, and Diane, a logistics expert who had recently retired from a shipping company and was bored with golf. I still don't fully understand this blockchain stuff, Diane admitted as Alex explained his system for the 3rd time. But I know every flaw in the current distribution methods. If you say this fixes them, I'm on board. Tom was more direct. This could actually work, if we can get it built in time. Time was their enemy. The investor money would last 9 months at most. By then, they needed a finished product and paying customers. They worked 14-hour days, 7 days a week. Alex slept on a couch in the office more often than not. Tom grew a wild beard because he didn't have time to shave. Diane brought homemade sandwiches because none of them remembered to eat otherwise. After 3 months of non-stop work, they had a basic version ready to demo. Now they needed someone brave enough to try it. I know someone, Diane said one evening. My nephew works at River City Distributors. They're small but well-respected, and they're desperate for an edge against the big guys. A week later, Alex stood in River City's modest conference room, facing their skeptical management team. You want us to be your guinea pigs, said the operations manager, a gruff man named Bill. Why should we risk our business on untested software from people we've never heard of? Alex took a deep breath. Because you're losing money every day with your current system, we can prove it. He pulled up their shipping data, which Diane's nephew had secretly shared. Last month, you had trucks running at 40% capacity while paying premium rates for rush deliveries. Your warehousing costs are 30% above industry standard, and your customers wait an average of 7 days for delivery. The room went quiet. With our system, Alex continued, you could consolidate shipments, predict demand patterns, and cut delivery times to 2 days. We're not asking you to pay anything up front. Let us implement a trial run on your East Coast routes. If we don't improve your numbers in 30 days, we walk away. Bill glanced at his colleagues, and if it works, then we talk about a real partnership. They agreed to the trial. For the next month, Neolink worked around the clock to make it successful. There were bugs to fix, drivers to train, and countless small emergencies. Alex barely slept. But when the numbers came in, even Bill was impressed. Delivery times had dropped by 60%. Fuel costs were down 25%. Customer complaints had plummeted. I don't know how you did it, Bill admitted, but I know good results when I see them. Word spread quickly in the industry. Small and mid-sized distributors who had been struggling to compete with giants like Pinnacle suddenly had a powerful new tool. Within 6 months, Neolink had signed contracts with 15 companies. The day they signed their 10th client, Alex took the team out for dinner, their first real celebration. To Neolink, Tom said, raising his glass, and to the guy who wouldn't take no for an answer. Diane smiled. I heard Pinnacle's stock dropped 3 points last week. Apparently, they're losing customers to smaller competitors who offer faster delivery. Alex hadn't been following Pinnacle's news. He'd been too busy building something better. They'll figure it out eventually, he said, raising his own glass. By then, it might be too late. What none of them knew was that in a boardroom across town, Pinnacle's executives were meeting in emergency session, trying to understand how they were suddenly losing market share to companies half their size. 18 months after launching Neolink, Alex walked into their new office space. They had finally moved out of the cramped, dingy quarters into a proper building with actual windows. The team had grown from 3 to 23 people. Their software now managed distribution for over 30 companies across the country. Morning Boss called Wade from the development team. Did you see the news? Alex hadn't. He'd been up until 4 a.m. finalizing their newest feature set. Wade tossed him a tablet open to an industry news site. The headline made Alex freeze. Pinnacle Technologies announces lawsuit against Neuralink for alleged trade secret theft. They're saying you stole their proprietary information, Wei said. That's crazy, right? Alex felt a mix of anger and, strangely, satisfaction. Pinnacle had finally noticed him, enough to feel threatened. It's completely false, he said, scanning the article. But it means we're hurting them. He called an emergency meeting with his leadership team and their lawyer, a sharp woman named Judy, who specialized in tech startups. This is a scare tactic, Judy explained after reviewing the lawsuit. They don't have a real case. You never signed any non-compete agreement, and your platform was built from scratch after you left. But fighting this will be expensive. How expensive? Asked Diane. 6 figures, minimum, and it could drag on for months. The room went quiet. Neuralink was profitable, but not that profitable. They were reinvesting most of their earnings into growth. We fight it, Alex said firmly. And we use it for publicity. If Pinnacle is scared enough to sue us, people should know why. Their PR person, a former journalist named Greg, crafted press releases highlighting how David was standing up to Goliath. Tech blogs picked up the story. Suddenly, Neuralink was being featured in business publications that had previously ignored them. Then came an unexpected twist. One morning, Alex received an urgent call from Bill at River City Distributors, their first client. We've got a serious problem, Bill said, his voice tense. A ship got stuck in the Panama Canal. Half our suppliers' goods are stuck on container ships, and we need to reroute everything. This was the kind of crisis that normally brought distribution networks to their knees. Companies across the industry were panicking. Give me 12 hours, Alex said. He assembled a crisis team. For the next half day, they worked frantically to modify their algorithms. Neuralink had been designed with flexibility in mind, something the rigid old systems couldn't match. By midnight, they had a solution. An adaptive rerouting protocol that could identify alternative supply sources, calculate new shipping routes, and prioritize critical items. It's not perfect, Tom admitted, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. But it should keep the essential stuff moving. They deployed the update to all their clients simultaneously. For the next week, Alex barely left the office as they monitored the system and made real-time adjustments. There were problems and complaints, but things were moving. Meanwhile, traditional distribution networks, including Pinnacle's, had ground to a near standstill. The contrast was striking. Companies using Neuralink maintained about 80% of their normal operations during the crisis. Everyone else was operating at 30% or less. Industry publications took notice. Neuralink shows resilience during global supply crisis, read one headline. Another was more direct. All distribution giants falter while tech-enabled newcomers adapt. The lawsuit from Pinnacle suddenly looked desperate rather than threatening. 1 month after the crisis began, Alex received another unexpected call, this time from his investor, Mr. Howard. Alex, I've just come from a meeting with some interesting people, venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. They've been watching Neuralink, especially how you handled the supply crisis. Alex's grip tightened on his phone. They're prepared to offer a Series B funding round, $20 million. The number was so large that Alex thought he'd misheard. 20 million? They see what we saw, but bigger. This isn't just about making distribution more efficient anymore. You've proven that your system is more resilient, more adaptable. In today's world, that's worth a fortune. After the call ended, Alex sat alone in his office, looking out at the team members who had believed in his vision when no one else would. They'd need to hire more people, expand to international markets, build out new features. And somewhere across town, in Pinnacle's gleaming headquarters, executives were realizing that their lawsuit hadn't scared anyone. Instead, it had only drawn attention to how badly they were being outpaced. The student they had ignored was now teaching the industry a lesson. Alex stared at the email that had just appeared in his inbox, sure that someone was playing a trick on him. The sender was none other than Mr. Richards, CEO of Pinnacle Technologies, the same man who had dismissed his ideas 3 years ago and whose company was still trying to sue Neuralink. The message was brief. I believe we could benefit from a conversation. Would you be available for lunch next week? Private dining room at the Capitol Grill, Tuesday at 1 p.m. Alex showed the email to Diane, who frowned. Sounds like a trap. Their lawsuit is falling apart, and now they want to talk. I don't trust it. Me neither, Alex admitted. But I'm curious what they want. Tom was more blunt. They're probably going to offer to buy us just to shut us down. Despite his team's concerns, Alex decided to take the meeting. He was no longer the nervous young consultant hoping for approval. Neuralink had just closed their Series B funding round, and their client list had grown to over 50 companies. The Capitol Grill was exactly the kind of expensive restaurant where Pinnacle executives took important clients. Alex arrived 5 minutes early, dressed in a new suit that still felt strange after years of startup casual. When he entered the private dining room, he was surprised to find not just Mr. Richards, but Pinnacle's entire executive team, the same people who had sat around that boardroom table and rejected his proposal. They looked older, more tired than he remembered. "Alex," Mr. Richards said, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming." They made awkward small talk through the appetizer course. No one mentioned the lawsuit. Instead, they asked about Neuralink's growth and complimented its handling of the supply chain crisis. Finally, as the main course arrived, Mr. Richards got to the point. "I'll be direct," he said, setting down his fork. "Pinnacle is interested in acquiring Neuralink." There it was. Tom had been right. "We're prepared to offer a very generous package," continued Mr. Richards. $200 million, with bonuses based on integration milestones. The number was staggering. Alex thought about what his investor would say, what his team would say. $200 million would make all of them wealthy. And what would happen to Neuralink's technology? To my team? Alex asked. Mr. Peterson, the CFO, leaned forward. "We would absorb the best parts of your platform into our new digital initiative. As for your team, we would evaluate each member for potential roles within Pinnacle." In other words, they would cherry-pick what they wanted and discard the rest. This wasn't a partnership, it was an elimination. "And my role in this new arrangement?" Alex asked, though he already suspected the answer. "We'd want you to stay on for at least 2 years as a senior director, reporting to our chief digital officer," Mr. Richards replied. "Your expertise would be valuable during the transition." A senior director, not even a vice president. After building a company that had forced them to the negotiating table, they still didn't see him as an equal. Alex took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. 3 years ago, he would have given anything to have these people take him seriously. Now they were offering life-changing money, but at the cost of everything he'd built. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but I'll need time to discuss this with my team and our investors. This isn't a decision I can make alone." Mr. Richards looked disappointed but nodded. "Of course. We'll need an answer within 2 weeks. The industry is changing quickly, and we need to position ourselves accordingly." On the drive back to Neuralink's office, Alex's mind raced. $200 million was more money than he had ever imagined having. But something felt wrong about the offer. That evening, he called Mr. Howard. "They finally showed their hand," his investor said after hearing about the lunch. "They've realized they can't beat you, so they're trying to buy you." "What would you do?" Alex asked. There was a pause on the line. "Normally, I'd say take the money. But this isn't a normal situation. You've built something that's changing an entire industry, and from what you've told me, they still don't fully understand what they're buying." After hanging up, Alex stayed late at the office, walking through the open workspace. He looked at the desks where his team had worked countless late nights, at the whiteboards filled with ideas for new features, at the wall displaying thank you notes from clients whose businesses had been transformed by Neuralink. By morning, he knew what his answer would be. But first, he had a counter-offer to prepare, one that would shock the entire industry. The business world was stunned when the news broke. Headlines everywhere announced the same shocking story. Neuralink takes control in unprecedented reverse merger with Pinnacle Technologies. It wasn't a typo. The small startup had not been absorbed by the industry giant. Instead, through a complex deal involving stock swaps and key investor support, Neuralink had effectively taken control of Pinnacle while keeping the older company's recognized brand name. In the gleaming conference room of what was still called Pinnacle Technologies, Alex stood before hundreds of nervous employees. At 30, he was now the youngest CEO of a billion-dollar company in the industry's history. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs," he began, looking out at the sea of faces. "That's understandable. But I'm not here to dismantle what you've built over decades. I'm here to help it grow in new directions." In the front row sat the former Pinnacle executives, including Mr. Richards and Mr. Peterson. They looked uncomfortable in their new roles as department heads rather than company leaders. The board of directors had made it clear: accept the new structure or leave with basic severance packages. Most had chosen to stay, swallowing their pride rather than walking away from their careers. Now they reported to the young man they had once ignored in meetings. Over the next 6 months, Alex continued, "We'll be integrating Neuralink's technology across all Pinnacle operations. This won't be easy. Change never is. But those who embrace this transformation will find new opportunities to grow with us." After the meeting, Alex walked through the executive floor that was now his territory. The corner office that had belonged to Mr. Richards had been cleaned out. Alex had decided not to take it. Instead, he was converting it into a collaborative workspace where teams could meet. His phone buzzed with a message from Diane. How did it go? He typed back, "Better than expected. Only saw 5 people crying." The joke helped ease his tension. The truth was, Alex felt strange walking these halls. 3 years ago, he had been invisible here. Now everyone watched his every move. The first few months were the hardest. Some longtime Pinnacle employees resisted the changes, clinging to the way things have always been done. A few senior managers quit rather than implement the new systems. But as the integration progressed, something unexpected happened. The combined company began performing better than either had separately. Pinnacle's established client relationships and infrastructure, when powered by Neuralink's adaptable technology, created something truly powerful. 6 months into the merger, Alex held a dinner for both leadership teams. The mood was cautiously optimistic as former rivals now sat side by side, discussing upcoming projects. "I have a confession to make," said Mr. Peterson, the former CFO, who now ran their finance department. He had had too many glasses of wine and was feeling nostalgic. "When you first presented your ideas to us years ago, I was the one who pushed hardest to reject them." The table went quiet. Everyone knew the story of how Pinnacle had dismissed Alex, but nobody talked about it openly. "I was convinced that our old methods were best because they were familiar," Mr. Peterson continued. "I was wrong, and that mistake cost our shareholders millions." Alex could have enjoyed the moment, could have let the man squirm. Instead, he raised his glass. "To mistakes," he said. "Without yours, I might never have started Neuralink. And without mine, and there were plenty, I wouldn't have learned what it takes to build something lasting." Later that evening, Alex found himself alone with Lisa, who had joined the new company as head of operations after leaving Pinnacle during the chaotic pre-merger period. "Remember when you used to stand in the corner at company parties, watching everyone else?" she asked with a smile. "Now they all watch you." Alex laughed. "The funny thing is, I never wanted their attention. I just wanted them to see that there was a better way to do things. And now they can't look away," Lisa said, "because you're their boss." Alex shook his head. "That's not the point. I didn't do this to become anyone's boss. I did it because sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to rebuild it from the inside." As they looked out over the city lights, Alex thought about the long journey from that first rejected proposal to today. The company name on the building might still say Pinnacle, but inside, everything had changed. Sometimes you had to be underestimated before you could truly show what you were capable of.